Mr. Painter, would you call the roll?
Chair Lowry.
Here.
Vice Chair Drobish.
Here.
Member Friend.
Present.
Member List.
Here.
Member Russell.
Thank you. Okay. Do any of my colleagues see a need to remove the any items from the consent calendar? Okay. So at this portion of the meeting, this we're at item 5, items of interest to the public. Did you have something, Andrew?
Yes, I do. Formally, we need an action taken on the consent calendar to either approve or deny it.
Okay.
I'll move to adopt.
Second? Third?
Third?
Yeah.
Who do you want to give to the second to?
Yeah.
Member Russell?
Seniority obtains.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
That was a motion and a second. That probably requires some other kind of action
Yes,
following.
we must
I'm not
have an
sure,
outcry
but
vote. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Abstain.
Motion passes. Yeah. Okay. Items of interest to the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter not on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. State law prohibits the commission from acting on items not listed on the agenda except by special action of the Planning Commission under specified circumstances. The chair reserves the right to limit the speaker's time to 3 minutes. The chair will recognize the speaker and ask that they state their name for the record. Personal attacks on individuals or comments which are slanderous or which may invade an individual's personal privacy will not be tolerated. Would anybody care to make any general comments on items not to be acted upon tonight? Okay, seeing that, that portion of the meeting has now been closed, and we move on to item 6, and that's communications.
Staff has no communications for the commission this evening.
That moves us on to item 7, the public hearing for 200 Brew Ridge Court, a conditional use permit, 2014-04 site plan review, 2004-14, Vicini Lubinsky Carter permanent parking lot. So I think I'll hand it over to you, Andrew, to
Thank you.
flesh this out.
Yes, tonight's request is for a 26-space permanent parking lot within a commercial zone. A conditional use is required under sections 10.3.3, 10.3.6, and the commercial zoning designation of 10.5.15C, as in Charlie, which requires site plan review under zoning code 1049 subsection C. The applicant in their application materials have addressed a needed additional permanent parking for adjacent uses to the location. The location again is 200 Brew Ridge Court. The site is in southwestern Placerville. Again, addressed by the applicant was the demand for additional parking, permanent parking based on the needs of the El Dorado County Department of Health and Human Services employees, their clients, and the public at neighboring facilities that are adjacent to the site in question. The site characteristics, it is 5 acres in area. Again, it's located in southwestern Placerville. The 5 acres are fenced. It contains a vacant single-family residence. There are a grove or several mature oak and other trees present, tree canopy on the site. And currently, the portion of the site containing tonight's request is currently used as a temporary parking lot that was granted to the property owner under a temporary use permit, which expired on May the 1st of this year. Access to the site is off of Brew Road first, and then you would take Brew Ridge Court. Brew Ridge Court is not a city-maintained street. It is a private driveway that crosses the adjoining parcel containing the Health and Human Services County leased facility. This particular location and site was annexed into the city back in 2005. As I mentioned, the zoning and land use designations for this site are commercial. And under the city's zoning code, the Planning Commission is charged to act upon all applications for conditional use permits and site plan reviews at a public hearing. When staff analyzed this request, we did look at applicable general plan and zoning consistency issues and zoning ordinance requirements. And the parking lot is consistent with the commercial land use designation in that the site is concentrated in a very well-defined area of the site, adjacent to the existing Health and Human Services facility, making it very convenient for county clients, employees, as well as the public. The project as conditioned would meet city and California building code requirements for parking lots, which is what this project is requesting, 26 spaces. I want to alert you to one of the conditions relate to two different aspects of the site that perhaps need some further discussion. Condition 1 will require the owner project applicant to meet all city parking and loading requirements under City Code, Section 1044. These requirements include parking space dimensions, the number of compact parking stalls, parking lot screening, aisle widths, etc. There are two aspects of this request, the compact spaces and parking lot screening, which currently do not meet, as designed, city parking and loading requirements. The request includes 10 stalls that are dimensioned at 8 feet by 18 feet for compact vehicles. That, out of the 26, that's a 38% of the total number of stalls are proposed to be compact. However, under City Code Section 1044, only 20% of the total stalls may be at compact dimensions. Condition 1 will again require the applicant to meet this 20% minimum standard. Staff has discussed this condition with the applicant's engineer, and the property owner intends to meet this condition. Once again, there is 5 acres of land here. The proposed parking lot would only use approximately a quarter of an acre of that land for this purpose. There is adequate area in which to accommodate that requirement. The second issue relates to screening, and under 1044, Section 1044, requires that a 4-foot-high solid fence, a wall, or thick hedge shall be permanently maintained between any residential zone and a parking area serving a commercial use. This particular project site to the east and to the south are single-family residential zones. They're located within El Dorado County. These zonings are R1A is the designation, and that stands for 1 acre residential district. The request includes landscape plantings of trees and shrubs. The proposed shrubs are Mahonia aquifolium and Berberis crimson pygmaea. The Mahonia aquifolium reaches 4 feet in height and 5 feet in width. The Berberis typically reach 2 to 3 feet in height and 3 to 4 feet in width. The Berberis does not appear to meet that 4-foot-high screening requirement. Condition 1, once again, will require adherence to the screening. Again, this is for permanent screening of the parking area only. Staff has discussed this with the applicant, and staff believes that an alternative species or additional Mahonia may meet that screening requirement, or the applicant could build a solid fence around to enclose the parking area. As far as trees and tree canopy used for this particular facility, the applicant has chosen the American tulip tree. Staff has provided you a photo, an image of what that tree would look like, not at maturity, but close to maturity. And that is, I can't remember which page it is in the staff report, but this species is on the city's plan list. It is attractive. It's a deciduous tree that will provide fall golden foliage. Now, overall, staff's review of the landscaping as conditioned will meet the city requirements for native species, shade trees, and screening upon installation, as required in all commercial and landscape or projects involving landscaping. The city does have a requirement for a landscape maintenance agreement. and that is also a condition of approval tonight. The parking lot will be externally lit, and the proposed lighting fixtures and poles and pole height meet city standards, as well as for full shielding and light intensity. The contemporary fixtures are similar to those from to the adjoining parking lot to the west. Light timing will operate at the same time as the adjoining parking lot servicing the county facility. In terms of environmental analysis, small parking lots that are accessory to vicinity uses are exempt from environmental review per Section 15311 of the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. During this public notice for this project tonight, staff did receive 2 public comments. They are provided in your staff report. One is from John Hill. The other is from Mika Van Cleve. Both commentators own property on 12 Oaks Court. 12 Oaks Court is located to the east of the 5-acre lot. That is a private road. Once again, it's in El Dorado County. The parking lot screening, they also mention parking lot screening as an issue, disturbance of wildlife during construction, and a request for a buffer area between their property and the parking area. These were concerns and comments raised by those 2 commentators. The proposed location of the parking area and the vegetative screening as proposed and conditioned is expected to minimize these concerns, as I've discussed earlier. Staff does support the request. Staff believes the commission can make supportive findings for the conditional use permit and the site plan review, and make the findings that they are consistent with the general plan and the zoning ordinance. Staff therefore recommends the commission make the findings beginning on pages 4 and continuing on to page 5 for the conditional use permit and site plan review, and then conditionally approve the request subject to the conditions which are part of Exhibit C of staff's report. The applicant is in the audience this evening, and that concludes my staff report.
Thank you, Andrew. At this time, I'd like to invite the applicant and representatives to come to the podium and speak to their proposed project.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. And one thing I do want to say, somebody asked me on the street, by the way, I'm Gordon Bassini. I'm one of the 3 owners of the parcel, and asked why we waited 2 years to do this. Well, first of all, our tenant was in the process of thinking of moving. And I don't know if you've read the report or not, but there are 316 people working in that building, which is a pretty good, they have to eat somewhere every day, blah, blah, blah. And to make a long story short, we wanted to keep them in the city and not leave our building. So 2 years ago, during negotiations, they threatened to leave, and the main problem was that the overflow of people, not only staff. And one thing I want to clarify before I should go any farther, when the project was built, we have more parking than is needed for our building, I believe. And I think that's in the report somewhere that says that, so when we originally built the building, the 18,000 square foot, we had adequate parking for everything. Well, because of the business there, it has grown. There are, I think, something like 28 employees that park their cars, or their government cars that park there all night. So that, you don't really consider that when you're looking. But so what has happened, the overflow kept going out onto Brew Road during the day. There wasn't enough parking. Make another long story short, complaints were filed through the city, back to our tenant. What are you going to do about getting these people off the street? So again, going through negotiations with them, not knowing if they were going to stay there, we went to the city to get a temporary permit to use this site just for the site that we're discussing now for additional parking, mostly for employees only. And so that's why we did this 2 years ago. Well, now we have, they have signed on for a longer-term lease, and we wanted to get this done. Hopefully, our intent was to have it done before May, so we're in violation right now. So, not that I've never been in violation of anything before in my life, but this one I've got to admit that we're a couple months behind, but the process is, staff has been working with us, helping us, and our engineer who has done several projects with the city and with your staff helps and making it the road a little bit easier to get through and try to get everything taken care of. When we come to you, you have a full package. Like I said, it's been built, it's been there for 2 years. It does not meet the standards that we're going to bring it up to now. So if there's any questions, our engineer is here. We can answer them, or hopefully we can if, so we're just trying to, and by the way, they will be there for quite a few years. So that's good for the city and us.
Great. So I think what I'd like to do is to ask, thank you for your input. I'm going to ask the other people in attendance to speak to this, and I'm going to ask you to come back up and maybe answer some questions.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Seth with Warren Consulting Engineers, the engineer consulted by the owners for this development. I'm here to answer any questions you may have, of course. One of the things that we were just discussing that we did want to bring up, and maybe it would be further discussion, is the landscaping on site with a lot of the requirements to reduce water usage. We had been discussing possibly an alternative type of landscaping than what's currently proposed, something that might use is maybe more drought-tolerant plants, don't need a lot of water, or rock, more cobble than we currently have planned. Currently in the plans, we are removing a lot of the existing blackberry bushes that are next to the facility and replacing it with a cobble. So perhaps expanding that cobble to different areas around the site to try and reduce the water usage that this additional landscape would require. So that's another thing that we had just been discussing. We'd like to bring it to your attention. So other than that, I'm here to answer any questions you may have, and I appreciate you reviewing this project.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to ask anyone from the public who has a desire to speak to this item in front of the commission right now, please come forward to the podium.
Sue Rodman, Placerville resident, and I was very glad to see on the plans that it said the existing trees, especially those large mature oaks, would remain, because the large trees sequester carbon, they remove carbon dioxide from the air, they reduce pollution, they provide oxygen through photosynthesis. And if you don't believe that they cool both the air and the ground, I would invite you to go out to the desert at the same elevation that we are here without any trees and see how much warmer it is. Trees like that are part of our heritage. The age really correlates to this size. You can just about say that a diameter of breast height is the way we usually measure trees, and about a foot of diameter is about 100 years. So those trees that are 24-inch diameter were here before the gold rush, and the ones that are 48, 36 were here before the Revolutionary War. So I'm glad to see that you're not proposing to destroy any of those, and I'm glad to see that you're going to do something about the parking along Brew Road, because it really is a problem. I worked for the Forest Service, which is right across the road, and it's a nightmare to get out of there when you need to, when work is over, because of all the cars parked. You really have no sight distance, and people coming out of the county's parking lot can't tell that there's anybody else trying to get out across the street. So I think that this is a good plan. I think this is something that's needed. Whatever environmental things have been done are already in place. I would suggest that you be very careful with your landscaping. I would suggest you go for xeric landscaping that doesn't require a lot of water. Tulip trees are pretty water thirsty. You might think about doing native species instead of tulip trees. They are pretty, but they do take much more water than some of our more robust native species. Black oaks take much less water. They grow a little slower, but they are a beautiful tree and give you plenty of shade when they do mature, and they're not a lot more slow growing than the tulip trees. Those are not a real fast growing species anyway, and most fast growing species are the ones we don't want, like the ailanthus. So I think this looks like a good plan. That would be my input, would be look at native trees, make sure that you give them enough space around their root so that they've got sufficient water uptake from the soil and air for their root systems, so you don't end up with the same thing we had on Main Street where the holes were much too small and the trees all died. So those are my comments, and I'd be in favor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rodman. Sir?
Yes, my name's Mike Lubinsky. I'm one of the owners, and of course, I'm in favor of
Okay,
accepting.
okay. All right, well, I'm not seeing anyone leaping up to speak out against this, so I guess at this point I'd like to ask the developer, the sponsor, and his consultant to return to the podium so that we can play triple jeopardy here. So I'll sit back and allow my colleagues to ask you any questions that occur to them.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little bit confused. Is the public hearing still open, or have we closed? Yeah, and we
Well-
didn't have questions of staff, and I had a couple of questions for staff, so.
And I thought what I'd do is bring it back to staff after we've had an opportunity.
fair enough.
But if you prefer, we can go back to Andrew. It's,
However you'd like to run it, just
Okay.
wasn't sure where we were at in terms of process. Yes, it's fine. You're a raconteur, I think, from your kind of flaneur.
Okay, gentlemen, I apologize for the sidebar there. So do any of my colleagues have any questions to pose to the project sponsor and his consultant?
Both of the written comments that came in make reference, well, to several things, but they both want to make sure that there's a 20-foot setback between the parking lot and the residential areas. What is the nearest residential home to that?
The nearest residential home, or I guess property line to this facility is approximately 100 feet from the edge of our parking lot.
Okay, I thought it was well beyond 20
It's
feet.
well beyond, yes. And I believe the resident that sent that message in, theirs is actually on the other side of the property, which is like 300-400 feet away from our development.
Right, okay. I guess the thing that I'm curious about now, I'm always the guy interested in landscaping. And you mentioned that you might be wanting to change it now with some more drought-tolerant species. So that kind of leaves us in limbo about, are we approving or discussing what you've presented, or is there going to be an amended plan of some sort?
I guess it would be more perhaps filing an amendment.
What we could do now is go in with what you recommend or what is approved, and with EID giving us extra water, because this would be more than what we're allotted right now and having to cut back 35%. We would, we want to put in whatever, what is best for the site. We definitely want shade, but we don't want to have to be paying, 3 times for the water for the next, 4 or 5 months just to get to, if we plant the trees in November, December, when rainy season hopefully is coming, but to go out there and plant, $300 trees there now and watch them die and, give them 8 ounces of water a day, that's not going to do anybody any good. So whatever, we're agreeable to, but we don't want to put, a lot of money into trees right now and find out we can't get water. That's it. So that's something that we can come up with.
It seems like, the main concern so far would be to make sure you have the 4-foot high, buffer, barrier, fence, whatever. And I'd prefer plant material over a fence, I believe. You probably would too. So I think that has to be determined what you're gonna use there. And I like your suggestion about using a native tree instead of the tulip tree. I think tulip trees are great and beautiful, but I think maybe more in keeping would be an oak species, and there's 2 or 3 that would be suitable for that. So, you know, I'd leave that open for your choice, but I think that would be a preferable choice, and in the long run, they'll use a lot less water.
Well, that's true. It's just, I don't know how long I'm gonna live, but to see a black oak out there, I don't see it giving any shade in my lifetime, put it that way.
No, there's,
Yeah.
you know, up at, just down the street or up there, I forget which direction it is, you know, the new restaurant, the Independent, and there's 3 agrifolia oaks there.
Yeah.
And I've been watching them since they've been put in.
Yeah.
And they're doing
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah.
So
A
I
black
think
oak's
maybe
not gonna cut it, you know,
it's-
or
That's
white
not a
oak.
black oak,
No.
it's the
Yeah.
agrifolia,
Okay.
it's a valley oak, and I think you might consider that.
Works. By the way, there are 2 fairly large trees out there right now that one has no leaves on it. On site, it's probably about 26 inches, 28 inches. It's, you know, it's dead. So when it falls down, we'll cut it up. But there are no trees to be taken out in the construction site now.
Good.
Just blackberries, that's all.
Well, I got to follow up with that then. So you were going to go ahead and leave that tree in? You don't want to just go ahead and take it out if it's dead?
We're going to leave it there until it falls down, you know.
Falls down on a car?
It's far enough away, the only thing is it falling on
Yeah,
earth.
okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. How do the utilities serve this parcel? Where do they come from? And
If you're referring to just electricity for the lighting, they would just be stretched off of the existing lighting system that's out there. Other than that, there's really no need for water, sewer, or anything extended to this parking lot itself, and there's none proposed to be installed. The house itself, I assume, is run off of probably not a well, probably a water line.
Water line, but for the drip system or whatever we do for landscaping, that would come off. That would come off the existing system that's there now.
so the property owners of tonight's parcel and the parcel that
Same-
you're
same
pulling from are
property
the
owners.
same owners?
Same owners.
Yes.
Okay. And then a question for staff, is that allowed in city code to service a parcel with utilities from another parcel?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to know. I do have some other. Yeah. Okay, great. Since you probably know the construction of the temporary lot, it will come up to the code that I read somewhere in there, the fire department, it needed a certain,
Yes.
certain.
Weight loading on
Yeah,
the paving,
so
yes.
it'll meet that, and you're basically just paving over exactly what's already there. You're not increasing the footprint at all.
No, it's pretty much just what you see out there today, the chip seal lot that's there. It will be paved over, and then standard curbs poured around the edges, and then landscaped, more like a traditional lot you would see anywhere else.
Okay. And then if you did want to change the landscape plan, would you be for coming back at a later date with a complete plan that you're comfortable with?
Well, I think because they are behind on getting a permitted lot open, we'd like to just get it approved so they can build it, and then come and submit at a later date to change the landscaping to, I think, what would be
That's
more
kinda,
water-wise.
because that's only, anyway.
Mr. Chairman, if
Would you
staff
wanna
could
just
comment
delay
on
it?
that.
Would you wanna delay
The
it?
commission
Come
would
back later?
have primarily 2 options.
something else.
One option would be to approve the preliminary landscaping plan as presented, and then give staff detailed direction as to what changes you would like to see made. For example, there was discussion of the species of oak. I heard a commissioner mention Quercus agrifolia, which is coastal live oak. We wouldn't recommend coastal live oak. We recommend valley oak, which is Quercus lobata. We wouldn't recommend Quercus kalagii, which is the black oak, either at that elevation and location. Either the blue or the valley would suffice. So But any other level of detail, whether you want xeriscaping or certain percentage of canopy cover of the parking lot, if you give us sufficient detail, then you can direct staff, and you can have staff then would approve the final landscaping plan. If you don't feel comfortable with doing that, then we would have to reschedule it for hearing to come back at a future date and bring back a final landscaping plan. But those would be your two options.
You're right. I meant Lobata. I had it backwards, you know, so that's the tree I would choose is the valley oak, yeah.
Well, I'm, speaking for myself, I'm perfectly comfortable to have staff to negotiate the details of the landscape plan within, within the rubric that we've agreed in terms of thirsty plants, xeriscape plants, valley oaks, all of that thing. Really, this is like the ham and eggs breakfast. It's the applicant who is going to be in some sort of suspense on what the plant list, although I don't see it being some outrageously expensive plant list. But on the other hand, that allows the applicant to proceed with their project without any further delay. So, so that's, Michael, did you have some more questions? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll turn it back over to
So
Michael.
if the same owners control the lot next door, there's an existing light there where the light is not facing down, it's angled at the lot, so you can make sure that becomes downlight?
The light that was added for the temporary lot, yeah, currently in the plan, that light would be removed, that angle one, so, and then the new lighting would, yeah, so you wouldn't have that temporary light, yeah.
And then, question for staff, does Planning Commission have the authority to override the required 4-foot solid barrier between zones?
I'm not following the line of question.
Well, it's required between, another question too.
It's a city code requirement that either it have a fence, a wall, vegetative screening, 4 feet or less. 4 feet minimum.
Okay, unless the Planning Commission finds, I like the open look. I don't see any reason for blocking. It's a beautiful view.
I think perhaps a counter to that argument, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I think you have to look at it from, this is a permanent facility. Things change over time. In fact, we had a similar discussion about trees on the premises of a bed and breakfast, on whether or not those trees, if they weren't there, would that new addition be visible or not? So I think that's where I'm going with it. If this truly is, and it is a requested permanent facility, perhaps that screening should be permanently installed
And
in some fashion as you direct.
And the location could either be at the perimeter of the parking lot or at the property line.
I would leave that up to the commission to make that determination.
There's no neighbors here, are there, to say what they would prefer?
But I hope you appreciate the kind of the reaction there, or the relationship to a previous project, because I think you have to look at it from a permanent construction.
And then staff question, if any of the planted landscaping died over the next year or the next 5 years, it would have to be replaced?
The landscape maintenance agreement, when recorded, would encumber the applicant to reinstall or provide landscaping that meets the intent of the approved landscape plan as directed by this body.
In forever?
As long as that recorded document exists, or things change 50 years from now, perhaps that won't be a commercial site, that might be something else, and maybe those agreements won't be necessary. But in perpetuity, that's in essence what it's for.
Okay, thank you.
Just, I don't see any geologists in the room, but I am just curious. Is that I've driven the gravel lot. Is serpentine present in that area?
No, from our
Okay.
review, it was not an area that contained serpentine rock or asbestos. It was
I-
outside
the only reason I ask is paving a gravel lot we've got serpentine present would only be a net benefit to the surrounding folks, so.
Yeah.
That's why I asked, that's the intent of that question, so there's no misunderstanding there.
Yeah, not to say that it couldn't be found during construction, but at this point, we weren't grading significantly other than to
Right.
cut in curbs, just
Yeah.
paving over the top of chip seal. So
Right,
essentially, yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, the spirit of my question was to just, to express my opinion that capping it is probably, if there is any serpentine,
Yeah, I would
a better
agree.
way to prevent it from getting in the air. So I guess we're ready to, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And I guess we're ready to engage directly with our staff and kind of flesh out these landscaping.
Yeah, get out your sunset books.
Yeah, okay.
I don't have one here, sorry.
Okay. Okay, well, let's go around the table here, and if people are facile with the Latin designations like Les and Pierre, well, by God, let's let them have at it.
I have questions for staff.
So as the applicant indicated, their current TUP has already expired in May, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So just from a purely technical standpoint then, and this isn't meant to be critical of the applicant, but they're operating outside of a permit. Do we have some sort of a grandfathering or temporary permitting process? I mean, they're obviously actively engaged in a process to solve the problem, but from a purely technical, legal perspective, is there some kind of umbrella or protection that we give them or designation?
That's a fair question. It is, from public record, the applicant has submitted timely their application for this permanent facility prior to the expiration date of the temporary use permit.
That's a great answer. I appreciate that. In the 2 years now that this facility has been operated based upon the permitting, have there been any complaints, issues, challenges, problems, or anything of that like with it?
Yes.
Okay, can you elaborate on those?
One was a letter sent without a return address, and that was maybe 2 years ago. We don't know who the letter writer was.
Well, fair enough, but what was the problem, though? I'm sorry.
The concern raised in that letter addressed why was a temporary use permit granted to this particular property owner and a property owner to the north, which this body reviewed their request to expand their parking lot a couple of months ago. Mr. Wilkinson. It addressed the concern that the city was granting temporary use permits to, here I'm characterizing.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I think
it's
my.
very difficult for me to characterize
I think
the
my
letter.
question wasn't clear.
Okay.
What I'm asking, Andrew, and the spirit of my question is, so we have a permitted use, even though it's technically expired, but there's been a permitted use for the last 2 years. It's been used in accordance with that permitted use.
Correct.
Have there been any issues, problems, concerns since it has been used? Because we're now going to convert it to a permanent use of the same type. Have there been any problems with the parking lot? Has it caused any issues?
Has it failed? Can you be more specific? No,
Okay, fair enough.
They
Okay.
have met the conditions of
All right.
approval, yeah, if that's.
Well,
that's what you-
and the use of the parking lot has not caused any issues, right?
No.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Good answer. Now,
I'm going to go ahead and chime in myself, since I had various discussions with members of the public that maybe Mr. Painter isn't aware of. But I did, as far as myself, no complaints regarding the operation or maintenance of the parking lot. The only comment that I received, and that letter writer, it could have been the same person, but I met with a person individually that came to our office complaining that the city was continuing to reapprove a temporary use permit, therefore de facto permanent parking lot. Staff agreed with that assessment, and that the code did not allow a continually ongoing use to continue under a temporary use permit. And so we agreed and we required a conditional use
Fair.
permit to make it a permanent lot.
Fair enough. Let me give you an example of a hypothetical problem that I just created in the short little time that I had here. Let's say in the wintertime when the day hours are very, very short, but cars coming and going and their headlights disturbing surrounding residents. Any kind of problems like that. The use of the lot hasn't generated any kind of problems, right?
No, the city has received no.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So there's no reason to deny it on that basis. Then I'll go to perhaps what is my greatest concern, and I don't know that I'm entirely alone with this, and that is condition 2 in Exhibit C, and that deals with the landscape maintenance agreement and the timing as to the use of the facility, the work being done and its use thereto prior to us being the city having satisfaction with regards to all of the landscaping. And I am uncomfortable, because we've been down this road so many times, I am uncomfortable allowing projects to go forward and then the project's there and then we don't have the ability, the leverage as it were, and certainly the enforcement ability to get the landscaping components completed. And so I guess I always view this approval and everything happening at the same time, and before you get to move in, that's when we have the greatest leverage. And I just want to make sure, and maybe this isn't even a question, I guess it's more of a comment, but staff indicated something to the effect, if I heard correctly, that we would be willing to allow all the work to proceed and we'll work out the details in landscaping later. And maybe I misunderstood that, but it seems to me that this is a project condition that needs to be met as part of the overall project. And I would assume staff would view it similarly.
I think staff would recommend, in order to tighten condition number 2, I would just recommend that I would modify it to say that shall record a landscaping maintenance agreement prior to filing of the permit, prior to filing of the construction permit.
Okay, so and filing of the construction permit, explain to me how that's related from a timing perspective. And I'm not speaking against the project, I don't want to be misunderstood, but I want to understand from a timing perspective that filing compared to occupancy. And unlike a building where you would actually move in, we're talking about a parking lot where you're going to pull in. So I just want to know what that. Let me state it another way. I'm assuming that to do the construction, the lot's going to have to be closed to do the construction, right? Because you can't have cars going in and out the way you're doing all the okay.
That's an assumption.
So it's going to
that
be
would true.
closed. So then I'm operating on the assumption then that lot will not be reopened until all of the conditions have been satisfied. And I want to make that clear. That the applicant does not get the benefit of using the lot when we still have other things that haven't been completed yet.
That would normally be the case.
Okay.
If the commission feels that that language should be strengthened, I think staff would support that.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure I'm
For-
clear
for-
with that. And again,
for
I'm not
clar-
speaking against the project, but I want these things got to be tight. That was a good word.
For clarity, you have to understand that the condition that was posed before you tonight, staff was not aware of the potential change in the landscaping.
fair
That
enough.
came up this evening, so.
And I think some of the proposals that came up with, and
Oh, sure.
particularly with the drought tolerant and native species, and I'll have some comments late in the meeting on another idea regarding that. I think are all legitimate. Just a comment, and in your report, Andrew, you were generally using all of the scientific names for all the plants, which is fine, but I would hope that we could adopt as a general process that we would also use the common names for everyone's benefit, because I don't know what a
Sure.
lot of these things, I mean, I might know them as Japanese boxwood for some, or maybe it's star thistle, I don't even know we're putting in star thistle. So I have no problem with the scientific names, but I think we should also use the common names as well, just provide some context.
I don't remember whether the landscape plan actually has it, but that would be the document of record.
Okay,
Yeah.
And sometimes
it's
we
right
get them
behind you,
yeah, and it's also right here in front of them. We get those sometimes, they'll say both, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, we could certainly,
Otherwise, the report was stellar. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make another suggestion too. Granted, the commission is going to be giving staff very definitive direction as to some of the requirements you would like to see in the submittal of the final landscaping plan. When you fashion that, I would also then include that, all landscaping shall be installed prior to use of the parking lot. Put that in there. We're not going to final the permit until all the landscaping is in. Because typically they're going to put all the hardscape, the lighting, everything will be in, and the planting is done at the very last. It's the
Right.
last thing that you do. And that's different than what they're asking. So, tell them.
So just a suggestion, Mr. Chairman. It seems that two things that we probably need to do then is to craft the language for staff. If we're not going to, first we have to make a decision if we want the landscaping plan to come back to this body, or if we're happy with staff following the direction that we provide. So, and I think we're on the latter is kind of what I've heard. Assuming that's the case, then we simply need to craft that language, and then we need to craft, if there's any other conditions commissioners have, those have to be added, but then the specific language with regards to the landscaping being installed prior to the final, signing off of the final permit and occupancy. That's what we'd have to do. Just
Completely concur. Okay, Michael?
If we are going to sub out the landscape plan to staff or others with better knowledge of the perfect plants for this, I'd rather defer to professionals that know and can give us a list. I know Sue was a forester, so if she has better recommendations, otherwise, Mr. Russell.
Well, we have plenty of, the approved plant list for the city. We have
Natives.
oodles of shrubs and small trees and large trees. And so I think, materials can be chosen from that list that'll take care of it, and I would trust our staff. I do have a concern. Well, I'll just make this point, I guess. As soon as the thing is paved and striped and a few other things done, it could be used. And I'm not concerned at all that the landscaping might not be installed at that time. We're in the middle of a drought, a very hot summer, and I think deferring the planting of the landscaping until it starts to cool off a little bit would probably be beneficial to the landscaping. So it doesn't bother me that the lot could be built and striped and the lighting in and all that stuff, and hold off on the landscaping until it starts to cool off a little bit.
staff does concur with that, as mentioned when Gordon talked about earlier about the planting of trees and concern about them dying during this drought and the summer months. And so it's staff's perspective where it's kind of contrary to this discussion we just had, but from staff's perspective, to have them operate the use and then come back to planting of those plants in the fall when they have a chance to actually live, I think it's the best interest for all parties involved.
I have a question, since the applicant has shown up at the podium. Maybe turn his microphone on. What is your timetable for completion of the project sans landscaping?
For the landscaping only?
No, except the landscape. What is the timetable for?
As soon as we get approval, we're probably going to start on it after we get the county notification, probably within a month.
Okay, so this is mid-July. They'll
Yeah.
start on it within a month. That'll be mid-August. You'll be finished when?
3 weeks after we start, including landscaping. But if the landscaping part, just why I stood up was, we can bond that, to simply, give a bond to this.
I appreciate that suggestion. That's an excellent
for the amount,
suggestion.
and that would be contingent on, and we have 90 days or something like that to get it completed. So that would cover your worrying about, completion.
That's a great suggestion.
So, that would be the city
All right.
from our bonding
Thank you
company.
very much for that.
And, that would, I think, take care of that. But, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one other question to staff I neglected to ask, if I may. I didn't look for this when I saw the site. Where is the closest public transit spot stopped here? Do we know offhand? Anything
Yes,
close?
the transit stops at the facility that came before you a couple of months ago
Right.
on the Wilkinson property. I know they turn around the bus there, and that's one of the reasons why the circulation pattern that came before you is that way. You know, he worked with they worked with the transit company to ensure that the turning radii would meet their bus requirements. So at a minimum, I know they serve that particular site. I've heard they also serve the actual building that's adjacent to this proposed parking lot. I do not know that to be true, but I do know that the Wilkinson lot, they do have a loading and unloading area for bus service.
Thank you very much.
I have a question for staff. So if, with the proposed bonding, that would be a good solution. Otherwise, just for future reference, if this body were to approve site plan review without an approved landscape plan, there's no authority to come back, correct? We couldn't come back unless we put something in there like in 6 months, we shall review this. Doesn't work on approval. It would work on a temporary use permit level, right?
Since I've been here, there have been numerous site plan review projects where an applicant has come before this body and received conceptual approval of their project. In many cases, an applicant does not want to expend the cost of the details of plants, but just give the Planning Commission generalized areas where the landscaping would be located, with the idea, and the staff has conditioned projects like that they come back before this body with a final site size and species-specific landscape plan. That has been very common.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to follow up with that real quick, the item would come back before you as a regular scheduled item. Public would have the chance to comment. Public would receive the ability to view these documents. It would become a regular agendized item.
Are you saying the landscape plan?
Plan, yes.
So,
That's how we've done it in the past.
oh, okay. So am I hearing you say that the landscape plan will next see the light of day in the third week of August?
No, what I'm saying is I use that as an example of other projects have had, and projects have been conditioned by this body to come back before the body with a final plan.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but this particular request is tonight. But
Okay, so within my limited ability to understand where we are, where the football is here, I think we're at a point where, given his input and command of the topic, Mike Friend is ready to
That is
craft a
so
motion.
wrong. I had a question for staff in terms of the bond amount or bond language, because we haven't done anything like that. Do you have something you can recommend, or, the suggestion was really good, but I'm not sure what the amounts should be, or is there something that's usual and customary?
recollection, we haven't done one in a while for site plan reviews, but it's typically 125% of the cost of the installation and labor to install that landscaping. The idea behind that is that the labor wouldn't be involved. If the city had to impose to actually have it installed, that labor would be covered under that bond, plus the cost of materials to actually put in the ground.
And that would be landscaping and irrigation plans?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So Mike's working on it. And Michael has more to add.
I was just wondering when the applicant mentioned, I asked where the water's coming from. It's coming from the parcel next door, and EID is basically demanding, asking us for a reduction. And just, is there no water service to this parcel? No dedicated water service to this parcel?
I don't know specifically. I assume that the residential dwelling unit that's present on the property had water service to it. Whether or not there was some speculation on whether or not it was a well, I don't know the answer to that question. Whether or not the home that's there now, it's still there. In fact, you could see it through the photo image behind you. I don't know if that home is served by EID or whether they have their own well. Again, it is 5 acres of land, so it's possible that they might have their own well.
But it would not be illegal for them to use that existing water well to service the needed landscape
Not at
for
all.
this parcel?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
So I will go ahead and move approval of the project as submitted, making the findings as laid out in the staff report, beginning with Roman numeral 2A through D. The findings as stipulated in Roman numeral 3A and B, and that really should be Roman numeral 4 on page 5 of the staff report. I think that's a typo. No problem. To conditionally approve CUP 2014-04 and SPR 2014-04 with the conditions of Exhibit C with the following modifications. The language in item Planning Division number 2, in the second sentence where it reads, issuance of a certificate of occupancy for, insert, and use of the site in accordance with city code, which adds a little bit of tightening to that language. So in addition to getting their certificate of occupancy, they also, they can't use the property until that item 2 has been satisfied. And then additional conditions, let's see, 18. Applicant shall submit a revised landscaping plan to staff utilizing trees and plant species from the approved city plant and tree list with consideration for drought tolerant and appropriate species as staff deems appropriate. Condition 19, a bond of 125% of the cost to install the landscaping in accordance to the plan as described in item 18. The labor and materials included shall be secured by the applicant in exchange for permission to delay completion of the landscaping plan until such times as weather conditions are favorable to support viability of the landscaping plan.
I'll watch the tape and get all that.
I tried to go as slow as I could.
Friendly amendment, just to make sure it's in
If we
there.
get a second, we can do that. We need a second to the motion first.
Okay. Okay. Friendly amendment, just to make sure that it's included that the irrigation and the landscaping are part of the bond.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I accept that amendment, friendly amendment.
Okay, and I have a question. I thought the intent of the bond, because one of the first conditions that you mentioned, Mike, was that occupancy of the lot would only occur after the vegetation was installed.
No, that's, the occupancy deals with the landscaping maintenance agreement.
Oh, just the
They have to
agreement.
execute the agreement.
Thank you.
And then the bond is to, we're going to allow them a deferral, as we discussed, for the reasons we discussed, but the bond will provide some protection to us
Thank you.
on the long run. Is that,
For clarity for staff, could you repeat the modifications you made to condition 2?
oh, yeah, absolutely. Those are the easy ones. So if you're reading along, in the second sentence, it starts maintenance agreement prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for and use of, that's what I added, and use of the site. So I want to make sure that you can't use the site until, even if you get a certificate of occupancy, you can't use the site until this landscaping maintenance agreement has been executed or secured, or whatever the correct term is. Just trying to tighten that up a
Yeah,
little bit.
technically, the language should read, if I were to be able to go back in time, we would not I should not have used certificate of occupancy in this case. This is not a structure. Structures would receive certificates of occupancy. In this
This would be
case,
a
I think
final,
completion of
Finaling.
permit, finaling of
Filing of the
do
construction.
we want to
construction
make
permit.
that change now?
Yes.
that would be
What's-
staff's
what's the-
recommendation.
So we're going to strike certificate of occupancy and replace it, what's the correct term?
Construction permit. Finaling of construction.
Filing of
permit.
construction permit, that actually makes it even more important to add the and use of, filing of construction permit and use of the site. That reads great for me. Is that good? Okay, so with those amendments, whoever made the second? Yeah.
My only question is, why are you tying the irrigation to the bond? I mean, normally in the construction process, you're gonna put your irrigation in when you do your construction work, not wait until the end and then put that in.
You'd probably put in your rough-in plumbing, I agree, but you wouldn't necessarily put in all your little sprinklers and gallon flows and whatnot. They can put them in ahead of time, but we're not dictating to them, in my view, the sequencing for the irrigation. They're not going to come back and tear it up. But everything because it's just a final, right? At the end of the day, it's the finaling of that. So if they have all the structural components that are there ready to go, then when they actually plant, they would add the final pieces.
I just think you're tying their hands that don't need to be tied. If they're willing to postpone doing the planting of the plants for 60, 90, 120 days because of the weather, I would think that they would, have the irrigation in place, ready to go.
This doesn't prohibit them from doing that. There's nothing in that motion.
But you're tying a bond to it. You're saying until that is complete, you're gonna have to take and figure out they're gonna have to figure out how much their bond goes for the completion of the irrigation, and I don't think that's necessary.
If staff can weigh in, perhaps I can help. The bond is going to be used with the assumption that the applicant does not install landscaping, does not install the drip system. It's to ensure that the site is landscaped and is adequately has water to the plants that are going to be planted. That's really the mechanism and why that's put in place. Does that help? It's to ensure that the landscaping gets installed, so that we have the money to do that if we need to. It is our hope and the likelihood that we will not have to do that.
I view it as all the rough-in plumbing is going to go in at the time everything is constructed, and then all the finishing plumbing, the drip irrigation aspect would come in with the planning. They may or may not put the drip irrigation stuff in advance, but they certainly could delay it. So my guess is that, Commissioners, that your issue is then what are we calculating the 125% cost on? And I don't know how fine we can parse it, but I don't think the motion restricts them in terms of how they want to approach it. And I don't think the dollar amount would be significantly different.
Yeah, typically an applicant would provide us with a cost estimate from a landscape firm, design professional, as to what the costs of materials, labor, to put that landscaping in the ground. And that's what we base the bond on, and it would be 125 or 150, whatever percentage that you want to put on it, but that's how it would work. And staff reviews it to make sure it's realistic.
Sorry to make this longer, but is the requirement of the 4-foot solid barrier have to be a mentioned condition, or that is just city code and it will get done?
It's part of city code. It's
And-
it's part of the parking and parking and loading requirements of the city
So it
for
would
any
o-
parking facility.
it would only be our choice if we wanted to demand it be fencing or native plants, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second. So I'll ask that Andrew conduct a roll call vote on this item.
Member Friend,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Member List,
Aye.
Vice Chair Drobish,
Aye.
Chair Lowry.
Aye. You have the option within 10 days to appeal this finding and decision from the Planning Commission to the City Council. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Okay, and we're back in session. So on to agenda item 8. So discussion item. Discussion of potential site plan review exemptions regarding alteration activities of designated historic buildings and buildings within city historic districts. And I'll toss this over to staff for some background information on this.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. The report describes two different exemptions that we have imposed kind of at staff administrative level, and those are illustrated in the report, just for the sake of the people in the audience and people watching on television. The two examples I raised, and this relates to a discussion we had at a previous meeting where the commission members were interested in perhaps devising a list of uses or alterations to buildings in historic districts that could be done in a more administrative way than to come before you formally as a site plan review, a historic district review. Staff has given you, like I mentioned, two in the staff report. One relates to roofing, and typically when staff receives a request for a house in a historic district that 30 years ago they received a permit for asphalt shingles, and the applicant is coming back with asphalt shingles where the historic fabric 30 years ago was removed. Staff feels that it's not the Planning Commission's really intent to review that type of request, because really if there was historic aspects to that roof, those have been long gone. I think just to illustrate a 180-degree example where we might want to review roofing would be if the city had a building, let's say that was Italianate in architecture, where it had decorative roof tiles, and a property owner wanted to change that roof tile to composition shingles. I think that would be an example where staff would not feel comfortable reviewing that administratively. In that context, I think that might change the character of that particular type of architecture. So that would be an example from staff's perspective that would be appropriate for a list that you guys may suggest. The second example illustrates a permit that the city recently issued for a request for photovoltaic or solar panels on top of a existing residential structure. That structure is located within the historic district. The home is listed on the historic resource inventory, but as illustrated in staff's report, there is state law adopted in the late 1970s which limits very strongly how and to the extent the city can prohibit or impact, deny a request for solar panels really in any context. The only under the law that the city would be able to review would be related to a health and safety. If, let's say, the roof was not structurally sound to support the weight of panels, that might be a reason why, or a sufficient reason for our building official to deny a request for a building permit for that particular type of thing. From staff's perspective, it is our belief that we would only approve administratively solar panels on a historic building if it was truly for the roof-mounted variety. If these were panels that were similar to what was put on the Marshall Hospital parking lot, that would be a structure, and that would be completely different. That would be a new structure, and I think would be subject to our review. But perhaps that might involve a little bit more legal counsel from our city attorney. But I think you can understand the distinction between those types uses. I'll turn it back over to you. Those were two examples. Maybe we could start the ball rolling. I know this body discussed windows in the last couple of meetings, so that might be on your mind tonight.
Well, initially, my takeaway is that whether it be solar panels, like-for-like roofing, and probably windows, like-for-like windows, however we decide, however the authority decides the meaning of like-for-like. What I'm getting from this is the solar panels come down from higher authorities, federal government, state legislatures. The policy on like-for-like roofing is something that City Council decided at some point in the past. And
Staff decided.
Staff decided.
Administratively, yeah.
Administratively. Okay, but I get the feeling for establishing these kinds of policies that the controlling body for that is the City Council. At least my understanding of our role as the Planning Commission is it's our role to implement policies that come to us either from City Council or from the staff in their professional roles as planners. So conversely, I don't think that we are the body to create new policy.
I can respond to that if you'd like me to.
That's just my understanding.
Okay. This body does have the authority to help implement the zoning ordinance, and this body has the authority to suggest changes to the code. Those, again, you can't mandate those changes. It's only a request to the legislative body, in this case in the city, that is the City Council. They're the ones who, if they feel so inclined, staff would offer them a resolution of intent to request staff to go back into and make changes to the code so that it does become the force of law. So in this case, I think what was suggested would be for this body to consider a list of potential alterations that could occur within a historic district, and that if this body felt strongly enough to recommend that staff extend that request to City Council for a formal consideration of a resolution of intent, then I think that's really where we are and what the purpose of tonight would be. In no case is city staff suggesting that this body would create policy. It would just be a way to facilitate the potential creation of a policy should City Council adopt such a policy.
Okay, and it also seems likely to meet it on a case-by-case basis. Let's say double-hung wood sash windows being one case. Whatever we would propose to suggest to the City Council that they codify and allow us to implement would require some iterations of public input. I can see in the particular case of the wood sash window thing, the manufacturers of vinyl sash windows may want to have an opportunity to weigh in
That's
on the
true.
wisdom of encouraging the use of wood sash windows, it being a corporate world.
Yeah, if changes to the code were the outcome of this discussion and council's action, staff envisions it to becoming a section in either section 1049 or 10410 related to the historic buildings in the city. I think that's the name of the chapter, and or the site plan review section, which both call out alterations to buildings in a historic district or historic buildings. Perhaps a list of exemptions would be how it would be phrased. That's what staff's kind of thinking. Should this move forward to reality, staff would probably approach it that way, where there are examples of other sections of the city code where things are granted, things that are permitted in a particular zone, things that are exempted from a particular review, and some things that are prohibited. So there are examples of that in the code, and providing exemptions might be a way to flush out those things that either like for like or these issues we're raising today.
Okay, and so, being very fond of stealing other people's work, is staff aware of, in the professional literature, and by professional literature, I guess I mean, Field and Planner or Guns and Planner or whatever those monthly organs are called.
Right.
Are there examples of other cities with a substantial amount of historic buildings within the city limits? Is there some prior art that we could leverage?
The names of the communities escape me at this particular moment, but I do believe there are some very large communities in the state of California that have similar language to the way ours reads today. And I think they became so inundated with window changeouts that they decided to perhaps tweak or provide exemptions to having all window changeouts come before a review body. But that would be, I can't think of the name of the community, but if I believe it might be South Bay in Silicon Valley, one of the towns down there, Cupertino or Los Altos Hills, Los Altos,
Okay.
one of those three.
Okay, well, bottom line,
Yeah.
it's out there.
It's out there.
Yeah.
My inclination with regards to this topic is that the commission, I think, was trying to strike a balance between reducing some of the onerous requirements on folks having to come before this body for things that we thought were fairly straightforward, while at the same time making sure that we aren't giving up or losing or sacrificing the historical preservation component. That, to me, that's kind of the juxtaposition. And so I would prefer to approach this from an incremental perspective, and rather than try to come up with an all-comprehensive list all at once, that perhaps there are just a couple that we could identify. I know in my experience here, it seems to me that windows, awnings, siding, and perhaps roofing materials have been the 4 items. I don't recall any photovoltaic or solar things coming up, and it seems to me that's less of an issue because there's a higher authority, I think, as the chairman said. But it would seem to me that my experience has been really around, and maybe color palette, I'm not sure, but really around those items, and I wouldn't really want to go beyond that at this point. We can always come back and revisit it again if there's a need for it. And the top of my list would probably be the windows. The windows first, and then probably siding, followed by awnings, and then possibly doors. So that's just based upon what I've experienced.
I'd like to add the cost impact to applicants too. Seems to me, it looks like there's a base cost of $400 for historical review, historical advisory committee, then coming to the planning commission. So I'd like to see something where I know the city needs to charge for actual costs. Applicant should pay those costs. But if the applicant can show that their project is going to cost less than the $400 fee, I think their fee should be reduced in relation to that. I don't know how everybody feels on that, but it would seem insane if somebody wanted to replace a $150 window and pay a $400 fee to get approved for it.
And so, speaking as a government employee, I will say that my experience has been post Prop 13, state, county, and municipal governments strive to make every service that they provide revenue neutral.
Correct.
So these fees, although they can be a little surprising, they're often traced back to what the average number of hours it requires to do something, a staff person to do something, at the loaded labor rate. And the loaded labor rate, I can tell you, is substantially higher than what I see on my paycheck. So that's one thing. One thing that may either helps to explain, or if you're not persuaded by that, that's fine. But that's my experience.
I will add to that. I completely agree. I want to let the members know, and the public and the audience and those watching on television, that when an applicant approaches the city for improvements to an historic building, that we let them know that those exterior improvements that are visible from the street, and you've all heard the language or read it in my staff reports, that requires review by this body. I can't think of an example where I have not asked the applicant, is there additional work that you are proposing to do? With the idea that they encapsulate all of their proposed improvements at one time, so that they get the best bang, pardon the expression, for the buck. Because if they do not do that, then 5 years from now, if they want to do something else, then they're going to pay the going rate or whatever that fee is at the time. Staff is cognizant that during the recession, not everybody had the disposable income and the resources to pay for those improvements all up front and disclose what they wanted to do. And for in many cases, that's why you didn't see many historic district reviews during the recession. That had a lot to do with it. But I want to make sure the commission's aware that we do illustrate to them that if they have other improvements they want to do, that they roll them. It serves your time and our time to review it, I think, best if you as a group understand the context of the improvements that they're proposing. And so I'll leave it at that. But we do advocate that if that's their long-term vision. In fact, the applicant for the Pleasant Street project that came before you in June, they in fact even announced to you and they announced to us that they wanted to make additional improvements to that site. They wanted to remove an outbuilding and put in a new opening to the wall of the building. Those improvements would require your review, but as they mentioned when they were at the podium, is that they financially could not even construct those this year, and so they decided to kind of withdraw or reduce the scope of their work.
The other thing that occurred to me as soon as the phrase Historical Advisory Committee surfaced in this discussion, again, as a government employee, and I know Mike's experienced this as well, I would suggest that we be very diffident and cautious in how we proceed on something that the Historical Advisory Committee might regard as within their purview, and in any event, we ought to approach them humbly and request their counsel on these topics.
I concur with that. So that was a question I had for staff. Would this general discussion this evening perhaps go to the Historical Advisory Committee, let them consider some options, and then would eventually work its way back to this body for some kind of potential formal request to City Council to consider some changes to the code?
I guess there's kind of two ways to answer that question. One is to have a definitive list for them to review, which might be the best use of their time. But the other option would be to ask them what they feel are alterations that do not rise to the level of scrutiny. I hate to throw in adjectives here, but you see where I'm going with that. So there's really kind of two ways to answer that question.
Or it could be a hybrid of both, frankly.
Yeah.
This body's recommendations and soliciting their recommendations and synthesize something from the two of them.
So I think they should consider adding to, in the section for demolitions of historical buildings and structures, instead of referencing subsection C, that you add also those buildings built prior to 1945 or thereabouts.
And again, to my earlier point, I would say that's something that we would want to seek the Historical Advisory Committee's thinking on. it's real important to me that we don't give them the impression that we're bigfooting their territory, to be very, blunt about it. And we don't know. I mean, there may be some things that the Historical Advisory Committee sees in the, in the overall workflow. If you can make some adjustments to your workload, things operate more efficiently. But my primary concern is that I do not want to get crossways with the Historical Advisory Committee. Full stop.
They are the junior commission, though, just for the record.
So do you feel that would be wrong to give a short list of basically what do you think of these improvements? Just maybe a general request of what do you think could be done better?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I would append to that or prepend to that what our observations have been, with, if somebody can be encouraged by, let's say we have the, the typical final window hearing kind of thing. If we have a mechanism that could let a homeowner spend $400 on another double-hung wooden sash window instead of a application fee, then that seems like a win-win. And I guess what I'm saying is if we try to communicate that to the Historical Advisory Committee in the first instance, it could be the foundation for
Sure.
going further a successful collaboration.
I would, if I have the commission. Pierre, do you mind? I'd be really interested in your perspective on this, based on your experience and your position. He's ready to give it.
Well, I think the way that staff sees this playing out is that the commission is going to give us those items where you feel really don't require the site plan review process. Very, very simple changes that people make. I know windows had come up several times in the past, so you want to articulate the windows. Maybe there are others. I think Andrew has talked about a number of those. What we'll do is then we'll just fashion a modification of the code. We'll take that to the city council, and basically we're going to ask the city council to approve a resolution of intent to amend the zoning code. When they approve that, it kind of gives us the green light then to spend more time on it. And so we would then brush it up, make the, rewrite the code as we feel, best captures those items that are not worthy of the site plan review process, put it that way. We would then take it to the historical review committee and get their input, bring that back to the commission, and the commission is going to have a final shot of crafting that language of the basically articulating those exemptions, and then we take it back to the council for final approval, and then it becomes part of the code. I thought I heard a commissioner mention that we want to look at certain things that maybe wouldn't require a fee, would be fee exempt, and that's really interfering with our budget. So if it's going to go through a hearing process, we're going to want to charge the fee. So we're basically looking at eliminating those items where there isn't going to be a fee because there isn't going to be an application, there isn't going to be a hearing. It'll fit within a very defined constraint of what we feel that we can just approve over the counter.
That sounds good. So what typically would be the fees to an applicant if they didn't have to come through this review? Just a percentage basis on their value, project improvement?
Yeah, they would come through. If it triggers a building permit, then they get the building construction permit.
So that would be beneficial to announce to the public that you would be saving this money that you could put back into your building.
That's correct. They wouldn't go through this process. They wouldn't pay what is the fee for site plan review?
For historic district review, site plan review, as it relates to what we're talking about, it would be $400.
So it's a $400 savings then that homeowner can put back into the building.
And in regards to stepping on people's toes, I'm sure that maybe staff would be able to tell other committees of potential thoughts that were rolling around and being discussed. And
I guess you're implying through the informal network?
or they could watch a video.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Pierre, I want to thank you for that. You know, one of the things I promised to try to be cognizant of is dumping taskings on staff without regard to the rest of the workload. And certainly, you know, you bring a new wrinkle to the surface, and that is some things that you need to do, you need to get permission to do. So, you know.
I had a question I forgot to ask about the solar. When it says that basically we cannot stop somebody unless we can make a finding of health and safety, but can't we tell them, well, it can't go on the roof of a historic building. You can put it in the yard on a tracking pole, but it can't go on the historic building. Don't we have that authority? We can't deny the solar, but can't we tell them where it goes?
I think that flies in the face of the act. That would be denying their right to utilize the solar panels where it might be most effective for them to utilize the energy of the sun. That would be, I guess, my off-the-cuff response to that. I think the health and safety related issue is really what we're left with, and my illustration before about the structural integrity of the roof and would it support the weight, that would clearly be an example where the city would have the right to deny an action. It appears to me that we're very limited in what we can do, and like I said before, I just didn't feel it appropriate for us to take that property owner and make them come before you and then tell you that you wouldn't be able to to deny them this request. They would be out $400, and all you could do is really provide them suggestions on maybe perhaps how to improve their project. So they would pay for that. I guess that's in essence what would happen. And it just didn't make sense from staff's perspective to require them to go through that process.
Yeah. I just read an article not long ago this spring that fire departments are starting to have serious problems with all of these photo arrays on the roofs, and some are even starting to decline to get on the roof. Risk of it just adds a whole new element of danger to them, and they're starting to get concerned and looking at changing the building codes. So that's a potential health and safety risk that we could look at.
Well, anymore when I encounter things that have come down from higher authorities on, say, photovoltaic cells on older homes, I just say 6 beds. If it's 6 beds or less, we are mute.
We'll remind the commission we do have a member in the audience, and this is a public forum, so if they want to comment.
Sue, would you like to?
Okay, it's on. When I first moved to Placerville, I was really impressed with the number of historic homes that we have. I was not impressed with what it would take to make one livable in terms of going through all the review and everything else that you have to do. And so I opted for a home built in 1979 that was exempt from all those things. I have since looked at a couple of historic homes thinking, boy, I would really like to buy that one, but they needed a lot of work. They needed windows, they needed siding, they needed the trim around the windows, they needed the trim around the roof. And I thought, okay, and what would you get into? Because some of these are single pane windows. I cannot afford a home with single pane windows. It's too expensive for energy costs. The first thing I did with the home I bought here was put in double pane windows. I got good Anderson wood windows, but I got double panes. And I would like to see us, when we're looking at historic homes and what we put into the codes, that we look at making these homes so they are livable, so they are energy efficient. And that means they need to have the ability to put on insulated siding. You can have, go to the, my favorite TV program is This Old House. They're in Boston, they're in historic neighborhoods, they are redoing historic homes. They look perfect when they're done, but they are upgrading. The siding is the same style. The windows are the same style, but they are double pane. They are double hung windows. It's beautiful when they are done. It's probably not cheap, I'm sure, but they are allowed in these historic neighborhoods, in other places, they are allowed to put on something besides exactly what's there. They don't have to keep the wavy single pane glass. They can make this home so it's energy efficient and so it's livable. And I would like to see the city look at their codes for historic districts in that light of, if we want historic homes to be a viable resource for the city, then they need to be upgradable to the point where they are energy efficient and they are livable, so that you can put in the insulation, so you can put in thermal pane windows, and you can have a home that you can afford to heat, that you can afford to cool, and that is a nice place to live, and not some of the ones that I see that, boy, they really need restoration, and they would be beautiful if they could do it. But if you have to keep exactly the same siding that's there, and you can't change anything, your hands are tied. So that was the reason I stayed for this little discussion, was to say we need to be realistic for our historic homes too. If you can do it on This Old House, we could do it in Placerville. We painted the place. And it wasn't painted with lead-based paint this time either, you know. We got rid of that, we put on new paint. So we can do some of these things with historic homes and have them really shine.
Thank you, Sue.
I have just a quick question for staff and then be done. What would be the possibility that it wouldn't violate any law? That if somebody going under a special historic district site plan review could pull the $400 permit fee, but it's good for 5 years, they can come back. If they want to change out the windows in year 1, they want to change out the siding in year 2, and then just maybe a small fee for that every time they came back. Or maybe no fee when they came back. Maybe that one-time fee is, you get approval, you come for your one project item, your windows, get it approved.
If I understand correctly, if someone came to you with one item, say windows, or 4 items, windows, awning, siding, then doors, the fee would be the same, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I would support something along the lines allowing the applicant to come with all of those items, and then they wouldn't expire. But I wouldn't support them coming with one item and then in a 5-year window they could then add something else. As if they came with the whole package, boom, because it's more efficient for staff to look everything in its totality. Otherwise, you've got to be reviewing it, but then so it would be an issue of the expiration date.
Yep.
I think that's kind of the spirit, perhaps, of what you're thinking. So I don't know what staff thinks about that, their visceral response to that, if that's workable or just not, or.
Yeah, typically when an applicant submits an application for whatever their project is, we always encourage the applicant to submit the complete package. So if a homeowner is looking at doing many different things to an old house, roof replacement, window treatment, siding, submit all 3 at once and get approval for it rather than coming in piecemeal, because we're not going to allow them to come in later under, with no fee when we got to go through the whole process. A staff report, it's very, very expensive to process the application. Hence the reason why we're looking at carving out those smaller items where we don't think it's necessary to go through the site plan review process.
Okay, so are we ready to move on to agenda item 9?
Does staff need anything else from us? You got enough kind of gestalt?
Well,
Gesundheit.
to be perfectly honest, I haven't heard really a list of things for us to perhaps consider. We've talked about windows, we've talked about siding, but haven't really got to the specificity. Perhaps this may involve further discussion.
Well, I would go back to the chairman's question. You know, are there other model ordinance that we could start? Perhaps we could start from. I mean, I rattled out the four.
I didn't want to
items.
presuppose that was what you were suggesting that we do.
But
That
I think that's
describe one of the
helpful. That's helpful
Okay.
to, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't speak for the chairman, certainly.
No,
but-
no, but I'm always of the opinion that, you know, prior art qualifies as low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, maybe from staff's perspective, maybe we'll find some representative communities where they've addressed certain issues, and perhaps a further discussion might be warranted before we engage the historical advisory committee at this point.
Right, and if we have to pick one, you know, I think
Yeah.
most of our discussion is revolved around this window thing. So maybe it makes sense, if for no other reason, that we're kind of all, it seems to be the topic of the decade for us.
It seems to be the improvement that most people want to do,
Right.
as illustrated by the speaker who was here earlier.
Right.
She mentioned that was one of the first things she did when she bought a home.
Right. Okay, so have we wrapped up item 8? Okay, let's move on to item 9.
Would you like me to talk about 9.1? National
No,
Night Out?
I think we get that. Thank
Okay.
you. We'll take that one as read. Thanks, Andrew.
Sure.
So anything else for 9.2?
Well, under 9.1, well, I guess 9.2, I will let the commission know that Tim and Ellen Page, they did appeal the Planning Commission's decision at the last meeting regarding the 10-bed residential care facility, residential treatment facility on Coloma Street. And staff expects that to surface in front of City Council on August the 12th in this room, 6 p.m. The information that Mr. Page has submitted for the benefit of the public and those in the audience this evening is public record, and it is available for those who want to stop by City Hall to review it if they wish.
Thank you.
As far as upcoming agendized items, it looks like that the meeting on the 19th will have, at a minimum, one item. There could be additional, but the one that we're about ready to publicly notice will be the Boys and Girls Club facility, the new building, approximately 14,000 square feet, facility at the corner of Mallard Lane and Green Valley Road. That document or that approval will consist of a mitigated negative declaration, site plan review for the new building, and conditional use permit because of the use at its location. There is an additional application, several floating around that may surface as well. One of them, some of you may remember, well, actually, that may not go. I was thinking of the teen center, but that actually may not be ripe to hear on that date. On that regard, that applicant has submitted a request to waive their particular. You may remember the teen center on B Street. They came before. Some of you were here. I think it was December or January, if I recall, where this body determined that their particular use was a use that was compatible with the business professional zone, but would require a conditional use permit. And that applicant has submitted their application, but are requesting a fee waiver. And Mr. Rivas will send that request to City Council. They are the authority on waiving fees. So once that gets done, if it's adopted then or approved, then we would process that post haste There are additional items I could talk about, but due to the lateness of the day and I'm haven't eaten dinner, I think I'm going to stop talking.
Okay, is there anything further for the good of the order?
Just one real quick item, going back to our first item of business this evening in the public hearing, and the whole discussion about the drought-tolerant alternatives to what was initially proposed. And I recall, and Commissioner Drobish confirmed, that in our native list that we have available, we do talk about the drought-resistant species and so on and so forth.
I believe they're labeled, yes.
And but they didn't seem to necessarily have that, and I'm just wondering if, given the circumstances that we're in with this, if there's some way that at the counter that could be emphasized, or people's nose could be pulled over.
Okay.
So I would simply make that,
Sure.
that request.
Sure. I know Mr. Nesbitt, Seth, who was the project engineer, he has come before you in the past. In fact, he was in his firm, the firm that he is employed with, Warren Consulting, was the firm that processed or provided the engineering details for the Marshall parking lot expansion project. So he's well versed on the requirements, the parking lot requirements for landscaping. But yes, staff will make it a note to provide a handout or have that plant list, because it is in a format that can easily be given out. That's true. Absolutely. That's a good point.
Okay, any further business?
Just a quick comment. We've dealt with 2 parking lots in the last 2 or 3 meetings, and I always leave thinking that parking lots need more trees than we normally end up having. And is there, this is maybe for long-term or future or whatever, specified that for each number of parking spaces, like 4 or 5 or 6, a shade tree is required, and then it's just sort of a, how big is your lot, and this is how many trees you need to put in it, something that, so we don't have this back and forth, the last time we added a few pine trees at the end of the Wilkinson lot, which was above and beyond what they proposed. This time, I didn't really see a place to do that, but is that something that we might want to consider? And I'm just throwing it out.
Yeah, the code, I'm sorry, I apologize. The code actually does have a criteria that shade trees in parking areas, I'm quoting, shall be planted at a ratio of 1 shade tree per 5 parking spaces. And the proposed trees that they had proposed tonight does meet that criteria. It goes further to say that landscape planter strip shall be provided for each 10 lineal parking stalls. What that is referring to is to break up the long expanse of linear parking stalls without some sort of vegetated barrier to break up that array of concrete or in this case asphalt. So yes, we do have that provision.
Well, actually, tonight's didn't meet. There's 26 spaces, and they're only proposing 4 trees.
But they're counting the existing trees that they have in the proximity as part of their landscaping, which we historically have included those in the past.
Okay, there weren't any trees very close, really,
What about, there's nothing mentioned about coverage of the lot at maturity with the trees, because the lots need trees growing. Yes, I mean, you can't just, certain species, you can't just put a vertical tree in there and call it good. It's going to do nothing. So I would like to see something potentially changed. I guess that's city code to, at maturity, coverage is 50% of the lot, something similar.
I'm thinking that as we continue to review and improve our development guide, that within that document we can have some policies or some guidelines in terms of a percentage of shading of the parking lot at a certain interval of time. A lot of jurisdictions have that. So for example, by year 10, you'd want to see 50% shading of the parking lot, of the surface of the parking lot for the cooling and all of that. So that's something I think that'd probably be the appropriate place to put that, so that then you can impose that in any of these discretionary applications. And therefore, we're not going to get, we'll get an appropriate tree species that will provide shade over time instead of, a lot of trees like, say, crepe myrtle, for example, would never shade a parking lot as opposed to, say, a London plane tree. I can still remember back when, and I think I was still on the Planning Commission, with my colleague, Mr. Friend, and we were working on a Midtown mall, and they didn't want to put any trees at all in that parking lot. Well, I've had the owners of that parking lot actually come up and, you know, thank the city for requiring those trees, which, as you can certainly see, have grown substantially since they were planted. And they weren't planted that long ago, but they're very fast growing. They don't interfere with hardscape, and they're drought tolerant.
Right.
And now they have a beautiful parking lot.
I mean, even in our exhibit right here, if you look at the property just to the north of the one we were considering, and you look at that lot, and just how barren that lot is, goes exactly to the point that Les is talking about. And, you know, that thought crossed my mind about, do we have enough? I knew the ratio had been met, but I really do think that we need to get to a coverage, shading coverage. I think that's really, really valuable.
And for my part, I'd like to suggest that we look at some of the things that SMUD has done, certainly what Marshall Hospital did. I'd like to encourage the installation of photovoltaic arrays on parking lots. Is there any further business for the commission? Meeting stands adjourned.